Weil Sprechen ist besser als Schießen. Und Wien bietet sich an als Ort für Verhandlungen. There is the role of the European Union and there is the overall position of the European Union. Wir brauchen ein Europa mit mehr Stärke nach außen und mehr Freiheit nach innen.
We start a new video podcast episode today with very special guests from the United Kingdom. That's my friend and former colleague in European Parliament from the Social Democratic Group, Catherine Stihler, who is heading now the Open Knowledge Foundation, a remarkable NGO. As well as Luke de Pulford. He's from London. He is a member of the Human Rights Council of the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom and especially fighting for democracy, where it's very crucial, for example, in Hong Kong and in other places on this planet. Thanks to both of you for joining today's video podcast. There's something, the whole mankind is affected, and all of us are already reluctant to hear about it, but we have to listen and we have to speak and we have to find solutions and ways to come through the pandemic and ways to come out of the pandemic. And that's why I'm more than happy that you spend your time in this video podcast today to share your experiences and views and perspectives for dealing with this outbreak. If I may, I would start with you, Luke de Pulford. Thank you so much for joining. In what way did you personally experience the outbreak of this pandemic?
Well, I think there are a few ways of answering that question. I can answer it from the perspective of my own family because my wife is a doctor. Although she's a psychiatrist, she does work within the National Health Service. So obviously she's felt very badly, very keenly, the losses of many of her colleagues, you know, a number of whom have been struck down by this, either getting very unwell and some of them sadly have ended up losing their lives. Not her close friends, but not too many steps removed from her immediate circle. So it all feels very real for her because she is currently pregnant. She's not able to do patient contact, which is a great relief to me, if I'm completely honest about it. But she, as somebody who is very vocationally committed to being a doctor, wants to be out there. That's where she truly wants to be, on the front line with everybody else. So from the home perspective, it's been odd. She's been at home a lot. The kids, who are 2 and 4 years old, are at home. They're not able to be with a childminder, so home is a lot busier than it would normally be. But they're doing brilliantly well. I'm very proud of them. In terms of my work life, it's been very strange. The parliamentary side of things has been practically non-existent because there has been no parliament until this week when they tried to get it up and running online. And yeah, probably the less said about that, the better. But my day job is to run an anti-slavery charity called the Arise Foundation. And what we've been doing is really changing all of our work to running an emergency fund. And the reason we've had to do that is that all the people that we try to serve out there in countries of origin where we work, where people are trafficked from, like Eastern Europe and like India and like Southeast Asia, the people there have found themselves just stuck, really marooned. Because we work among migrant populations who have very insecure work. There are people who have just been, you know, told that they couldn't go anywhere, have had their income removed, and have found themselves literally facing famine in very large numbers. So we've had to try to find a way of getting them essential supplies, which is not our normal work. That's what we've had to do, and really desperate. I mean, if I had to sum it up, I would say that those guys on the ground are saying that famine will kill them before the virus does. And
that's a very important point, maybe one of the most crucial negative outcomes and perspectives, not only for months, but for years, to face famine and people dying from starvation. In many parts of the world, we will have to face this challenge and, of course, contribute to solutions. Catherine, may I transfer the same question to you? How did you personally experience the days and the weeks of the outbreak?
So look, like you're right, my sister's a geriatric consultant in Glasgow, and so my sister is there in her ward every day, and so we connect with her. My mum, dad, who are in self-isolation, they're an hour away from us. You know, they're in their 70s with underlying health conditions, so they're, you know, they were self-isolating before it was mandatory that we were, you know, all locked down. So it's very real that, you know, that for my family. Personally, our day-to-day existence is, you know, there's my sister in the front line, and yet I'm working from home, and the organisation I run, the Open Knowledge Foundation, is a remote distributed team. So working from home is just part and parcel of what we were doing. And anyway, my husband works for the Church of Scotland as a lawyer, and he's now working from home, and my kids are being homeschooled. And so it's that family dynamic of all of us being here. But we try and have routine, and we try and make sure that that we're as stable as possible as our family. It's just, you feel there's two things going on. You feel that there's the NHS and people having to deal with these, you know, hugely challenging situations, and here we are quite safe and isolated, and it's just trying to, we go out on a Thursday night, I'm sure you do the same thing, look and clap for the NHS, or as we say now, we're clapping for all key workers, because it's not just the people in the front line in terms of the hospitals, but the people out there working to make sure we get food, to make sure that, you know, that people are served in the best way possible in the extraordinary circumstances that we find ourselves. In terms of open knowledge, we led the open data movement. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is saying why open's important, why open research and open access to research has meant that we can try and find a vaccine in record times. Open information is so important, particularly with the kind of the misinformation that's going out there just now, and what we can do to try and prevent that and stop that. And also, how do we get out the other side? Technology has certainly been seen as a solution.
Catherine, if I may follow up here, I'm interested in your view on different stages. As far as I have recognized it, in the different countries, we have seen different stages of recognizing this whole sickness, pandemic, outbreak for the public. So what stages did you see in the UK or in Scotland especially?
Well, I think that you saw that things were changing in terms of the policy. So, I mean, it's really interesting, isn't it? If you could reflect and look back and think, oh gosh, you know, but I think everyone was just trying to grapple with this extraordinary circumstance that we were in. It was my son's 14th birthday on the 23rd of March, and it was that evening that Boris Johnson told us all that this was happening, and now we're, you know, basically we're locked down. And there was a build up to that, clearly, but I think that it's just, you know, people are abiding by those rules. I mean, certainly in Scotland. Okay, there was a situation, I think you might have heard about, the chief medical officer that went off to her holiday home, which is a huge lapse of judgment, and she's no longer serving in terms of that particular role. But I think on the whole, people are being law-abiding. They want to work together to solve this situation. There's this sense of, you know, the people working on the front line, but all of us playing our part to stop this from spreading. Until we get that vaccine, how we're going to exist and what we're going to do. Somebody described it to me like, what did we do after 9/11? We had, you know, when you travel now, all those situations about security, how are we going to travel now in the future? Or are we in the same way? How is that all going to work? Are immunity passports going to work? How's contact tracing going? All these questions. And we don't have the solution to all of that just now, but certainly the way that we're going to exist as we start to get out of this, it's going to be quite different for a while. Some are saying 2 to 3 years. And I think that we just have to be quite honest with each other that there's going to be, you know, a way that we're going to, and we will get through this, and there will be a vaccine, and we will find that. But until we get to that stage, you know, even social distancing in schools, who would have thought that? How's that going to work? You know, you've got a 2 and a 4-year-old and a baby on the way, look, you know, how's that going to work? And how are we, what is that shape going to look like in the future?
Absolutely. Luke, did you see specific stages of attention from the side of the public to everything that's necessary? And if I may, I would add also the question of individual responsibility, because that's one of the specialities, I would say, specifications of this crisis. Not any governmental or parliamentary body can solve this issue. There is a specific responsibility of each and every human being coming along with the response to the outbreak. So what stages did you see, and what's your view on the understanding in the UK of this individual responsibility?
So I think we're in denial, to be completely honest with you. We treated this, and the media particularly treated it, as an Asian thing. They thought it was going to be like SARS and go away, or just affect that part of the world. When in fact, actually, Neil Ferguson, who's been so key to a lot of the work that we've done on this, was saying from January, this is coming, everyone, it's going to be a big deal, and no one was listening. And that was quite deliberate. I was speaking to somebody who's a BBC producer who was saying, people were trying to get that on air, and the response was, no, there's no point in making people panic. This is not going to affect us in that way. So I think we went from denial to major panic, and there was almost nothing in between. And from that panic, I believe that we've just now gotten a bit used to it, and now we're getting bored of it. So I'd say if there were stages, that's probably what they are. In terms of people's responsibility, you know, there are some nice things to come out of this. I think people are taking less for granted, which is really positive, but there's much more of a sense of community and social ownership. This is one of the things that we're not good at in London. You only have to use the tube and to get in someone's way to know that man wasn't meant to live in cities, you know. And we don't look after one another because there's no real social risk associated with these relationships. People go away and you never see them again. So why bother? Well, that's not been the case. People are looking out for one another. And that's a wonderful thing. You know, there are people in my neighborhood who are going out, who are feeding the elderly, who are looking out for those who are more vulnerable, and who are taking their responsibility to everybody seriously by socially isolating. But I would say one more thing. Where this office is located right now is at the back of an old people's home, which I don't go anywhere near. When I come in, you know, I can get into the office without seeing anybody for the sake of everybody knowing. And I'm the only one here. But, you know, whenever we feel that life might be tough for us, imagine what it's like for them. They're not allowed to have any visitors in the latter stages of their lives. If they are believers, they're not even allowed to have the people who will come and give them spiritual support into the building. They're completely alone, and even most of the people who work in there won't go up there other than the ones who have to provide them with basic essentials like food. So, I mean, they're the people that seeing them, or at least seeing the building so frequently, really make my heart bleed, and I feel a responsibility to them, but also powerless to do anything about it.
Very important to see the perspective of these people. And generally, human rights are actually one of the main sources that we need to figure out how to deal with the crisis as well. And that's the point where I want to transfer again to you, Catherine, as well as open knowledge, I can imagine. So what we need is a vaccine, as you have several times mentioned, and many other results of the academia, of researchers, of innovation. And I can imagine that open knowledge means a lot to that. So what's your perspective on that as a representative of the Open Knowledge Foundation? And what's your assessment from your side personally, as a former elected official heading the Open Knowledge Foundation, from whatever perspective you want to see it from? What's your assessment on the political response and on the media response, which also plays a crucial role due to this individual responsibility to this outbreak?
So, I mean, running an organisation where open is at your heart of it, I think Luke touched upon it. I mean, the sage advice and the fact of the lack of transparency around some of this, I think really needs to be addressed. And that's the scientific advice that's been given to government. And I think that would be a very easy thing to solve and being transparent about that. And also the way that data is being used and shared. Clearly we're kind of about, we promote open data, where, which is non-personal data, and clearly some of the health issues are personal data. Is how we get that balance right about the sharing that needs to happen, about the science, but also the privacy that needs to happen when it's about your personal information. And so there's a whole bunch of issues around, the apps that are being suggested, and the fact at the moment there's real challenges internationally to get a standard that was interoperable. And that might seem very technical, but actually, if the tech companies are creating one standard and NHS is creating another, and the EU is creating another, there really needs to be this international cooperation, certainly on that side, to get us through, plus the science to get the vaccine right and make sure the vaccine's available to not just those that can afford it, to the population as a whole. And then there's the issue about how do we learn from this. So I'll give you, I think one of the, I was saying how we always work remotely and distributed. And now this is the new normal. We're all working distributed and remotely. It's showing that things are possible in ways that maybe we didn't think were possible before. So that's going to be a difference. But it's also about how we learn from doing things. So can I share this story, which was yesterday? A friend of mine runs a charity in Scotland, which is children's hospices in Scotland. And he has got the world's first virtual children's hospice created to help children who can't get physically.
I would love it to share the information about
I will, and it's so inspiring when you hear people's stories and about what they're doing in extraordinary circumstances. And I just think we all can learn from each other and value that, but also just say that is amazing what you have done to achieve that.
It's a lot. Luke, what's your assessment on the political response on the one side and on the media response on the other side?
Well, the political response is very interesting and difficult to analyze, and part of the reason it's difficult to analyze is exactly what's been said. There isn't a lot of transparency actually over the processes leading to the decisions that have been taken, and you also get the idea that that the government's kind of getting a few scientists and chucking them out as collateral. And well, we followed the science, and the science has now changed. So the UK moved from this place where the rumor was that we were pursuing a herd immunity strategy, which, kind of like Sweden, was just going to keep the social distancing to a minimum. And then that flipped overnight to, oh, no, we're not going to do that, actually. We're going to go full on to lockdown. And we don't really know why that happened. We moved from a place where that seemed to be the scientific advice that the government was getting. And then overnight, we got different scientific advice. And it was all a bit confusing, and we haven't really had the opportunity to hold them to account because there's been no parliament. So I think there are a number of things that are lacking about it. We've been very bad about personal protective equipment. I think the excuses on that do not stand up at all. I know this because of some of the work in Hong Kong. Somebody came along to us more than a month ago saying, I can get you 36 million masks. Would you like them? Like, yes, we would like them. Put them in contact with the Department of Health. 3.5 weeks later, they still hadn't closed the deal. And the reason they hadn't, in his words, were because civil servants were clocking off early, because stuff just wasn't getting done. So I'm sorry, this is the kind of thing that you need an active parliament for. You really need to be holding people to account.
Yeah.
Good example. May I go deeper and to continue with Luke on social media? As far as I know, at least to my knowledge, the number of cyber attacks on Europe, I would say including the UK today, has increased, has doubled actually, from private sources as well as from state-related sources. So this also affects social media. This also affects what we call conspiracy theories and so on. So what's your impression on the role of social media during the pandemic, and maybe also with the pandemic as a starting point for other changes in society?
Well, I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective. Fake news is obviously a big problem. I'm not diminishing that. But at the same time, the kinds of media institutions that people would normally trust, or the big state media institutions, have failed, I think, quite badly through this crisis. I'll give you an example of where social media is very helpful. China. So Weibo is about the only way that you can get any reliable information about what's happening on the ground in China. And that may not be reliable, and it's almost impossible to verify. But I can tell you something, it's a lot more reliable than CCTV or CGTN, and which are the only images that we see of what's happening in Wuhan that get sold by the state-owned broadcasters to the Associated Press and to Reuters, and then get passed on. And then that's what we see. Well, that's not what's happening. So in that sense, social media does offer a little glimmer of hope, but the people who are posting those kinds of pictures in China now have disappeared. So it gives you an impression of the risks that people can take in order to try to share things freely on social media too. But fake news has been a huge issue throughout. What's interesting is that some of the truly crazy conspiracy theories that we thought back in January were mad. You know, people were saying this is China's Chernobyl moment back in January. And they were also saying things like, well, we think this might have been state engineered by China. It might have originated in a lab in Wuhan. And everybody's like, this is just nuts. What are you talking about? Now, you find that people are in a situation where they're taking that very much more seriously, including the US government, which is investigating it. I'm not saying that that's true, but it's interesting that social media has been so ahead of the curve, even with stuff that I think even now, the larger, more reputable state broadcasters certainly would be reluctant to publish. So I think it's played a very important role, but it's a double-edged sword.
Mm-hmm. What's your view on social media, Catherine?
So there was an Ofcom report, I think it was just last week, where it said that 50% of UK adults had been exposed to fake news and COVID, and 40% didn't know what was true or what was false. And I was talking to a researcher yesterday who's based in the west coast of the States, saying that in terms of social media, this is the only game in town in terms of like the amount of tweets. I think there's 400 million a day just on COVID. And somebody somewhere will kind of go back and look at this, because this has never happened before in terms of information. Just give a personal example. My mum shared something with me, and it was something to do with China. And my aunt had shared it with her. And then my mother-in-law, who's in the west coast of America, was saying the same things. Now, they're all in the same age group. And I thought, is this subtle fake news that are being targeted at women in their 70s, you know, in America and in Scotland? And so there's something there where we talked about micro advertising before in politics and how, you know, it's quite toxic. And we see this with some of this stuff as well. And I just think there's a lot of learning that we have to take from this so that we don't repeat this, and that we try and make sure, you know, it's also personal responsibility. If you think something is doubtful, don't share it on social media. You know, we have to make sure we stop some of this disinformation getting round.
We're already running out of time. So one of the most important issues you have already raised in the beginning, both of you actually, is starvation. Coming up, famine, coming along sometimes with movements for genocide in some parts of the world. So may I start with Luke again, and then have the final word from Catherine. What's your view on coming up issues as a result of the pandemic for very poor parts of the world, and especially the very poor people in these parts of the world? I only can share the experience from Calcutta, for example, last summer, where I had the privilege, it was a birthday wish from my side, from my 40th, to help out in the Missionaries of Mercy home of Mother Therese in Calcutta. And so I got an impression from an extremely different world. I have to be honest on that and very frank. If I would imagine how the situation is today during the pandemic and what the results, if this goes on, will be, it's extremely critical, and we have to care. So what's your professional view on this, Luke, and what are the perspectives?
Well, look, I'm going to talk about two things, because there are so many things to talk about that will come out of this. So the first thing, because a lot of Arise's work is in India, I hear a lot about what's happening on the ground. They're nowhere near hitting their peak, and they are already at capacity. I mean, all of the ICUs are full in India now, and they don't have a large number of cases yet. If this virus gets into the slums around Delhi, or even around Calcutta, you're talking many hundreds of thousands of people infected. The real number of people infected now in India is far, far higher than we think it is, or that's been reported. Now, that's an exceptionally difficult problem to solve. I don't have the answers to it. There is a lot of very inspirational work going on at the grassroots level there among civil society, but I'm terrified about what's going to happen within India in the next 6 weeks, is the truth. The other thing I really want to raise is the plight of Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims in China. Now, there are, by conservative estimates now, at least 1 million people extrajudicially detained in East Turkestan. And those people are disproportionately exposed to this virus and will get no protection from it. Perhaps even worse, we won't hear anything about what's happened to them. These are people whose graveyards have been bulldozed in an effort to try to erase all cultural memory and make them go away as a race and as a people who are subject to re-education on a mass scale. This is something which I hope the international community and the human rights community will pay more attention to. And I think particularly as this virus rages, let's keep them in mind, because those camps are not sanitary places and they're not people who will be given protection from it.
Very important. Thank you for these insights. Catherine, regarding the poor and coming up famines on places where we wouldn't have expected it before the pandemic. What's your view on that?
So I think if you look at those who were using food banks in the UK before the crisis, and now with those who have lost their jobs and who are the interesting thing is how communities are still so rallying round and trying to help. But I think that it just again exposes the fragility of how many people have existed for and are existing in. Many kids who go to school for their free school meals are not getting a hot meal a day. So there's huge challenges locally, but then you look internationally. One of the things was you looked at this situation was happening in refugee camps, and you think COVID going into a refugee camp and what that could do to kind of devastation. So I think we all have a responsibility in terms of how we help as human beings, and not forgetting, in this world that, sometimes when you look at our situation and the number of doctors we're able to have per, however many head of population, and you look at what that's like in some countries in Africa and in Asia, we are blessed in so many ways, but equally we should never be complacent.
Very, very important final words. Luke, when will your wife give birth to the baby?
August, well, it should be August the 18th, which is actually my birthday, believe it or not.
That's my mum's birthday.
This will be very soon. Catherine's birthday, that's a good sign.
My mum's birthday is the 18th of August.
Beautiful, beautiful. Good to hear that. So I wish you all the best for both of your families, especially for the baby. Luke, I hope everything will go well, and I'm sure it will. And of course, you're both in my prayers. And I also have to add, Catherine, that it's always sad to lose a colleague in European Parliament.
Aww.
But it's extremely sad to use a valued colleague due to something that's called Brexit. You will not be surprised that I'm against it. I was against it. I remain against it. And I guess we will grow together. And maybe things like a pandemic are not only something that teaches us to grow together in Europe, but all over the world as a mankind. This would be my view on that. But I'm more than happy to see you. I'm more than happy for the Open Knowledge Foundation that they have you now. We have lost you. And Luke, thank you for your outstanding work. It's important that somebody, let's say, raises the flag of freedom and democracy in parts of the world where that is missing. And that's actually the case. Stay healthy. All the best. Thank you for joining this video podcast. And I hope to see you soon again in person as soon as this will be possible again.
I hope so.
If somebody reacts with violence to a solution proposal, this is not a reliable partner. We have lost Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We should do all that we can not to lose the Western Balkans as well. Ich sage das deshalb, weil in Europa die europäischen Werte, die universale Werte sind, auch gelebt werden.